Good morning, Team Alabama. We are ready for page 6 in Hidden Figures. Please find it on your Chromebook and read along with me. They're going to tell a little bit about each of the ladies on page 6, so be ready to write some facts about each one. Dorothy Vaughan was a pioneer. She joined the NACA in 1943, the first year the agency began hiring African American women as computers. So that's a great fact. NACA, N-A-C-A, began hiring African American women in 1943 as computers, or mathematicians is really what they were. And she was the first to be promoted into a management position, and there's another great fact. She was a role model for other women, another great fact, and she helped to steer the careers of many talented women who were joining the NACA. Mary Jackson was the first African American woman to move up the ranks and become an engineer at NACA. There you go. Start a new area for Mary Jackson, and a great fact about her that she was the first to move up through the ranks and become an engineer. She was a fighter. Great fact. Standing up for herself and for other women who deserved the chance to prove themselves. Her work helped to make supersonic aircraft fly higher and faster. And there's another great fact about her. Her work helped make supersonic aircrafts fly higher and faster. Katherine Johnson. She was an African American woman who became an essential member of the team that put the first American in orbit around Earth. There's a good fact. She was a dreamer, another fact, and an independent thinker, another great fact, and was unafraid to imagine what others considered the impossible. She helped do the math that was required to send the first men into space, great fact, and to bring them home safely, another good fact. Christine Darden was an African American woman who became one of the world's leading experts on supersonic flight. She became the face of the next generation of female space scientists. Her groundbreaking research on predicting sonic booms is still used today. Page 7. The accomplishments of these 4 women were remarkable, but their work was even more impressive because it was achieved while living and working in the South during a time when racial discrimination was commonplace and when most women with an interest in math were expected to become math teachers. Okay, now these are all great facts on page 7 that you could put down in your 50 facts. A different time. In the 1800s, after the Civil War, the government passed laws that ended slavery and granted full citizenship and voting rights to African Americans. Later, however, many states and local governments passed other laws that legalized racial segregation. These regulations, which were most common in the South, kept black people and white people apart in many situations. They could not drink in the same restaurants. They could not drink from the same water fountains. They could not use the same restrooms. They could not attend the same schools. They could not ride in the same parts of the buses. They could not live in the same neighborhoods. They could not receive care in the same hospitals. They could not visit the same beaches. They could not compete on the same sports teams. They could not sit in the same sections in movie theaters. And they could not marry someone of a different race. So America was really ugly as a country at this point in time. And so we really had a lot to overcome, and we're still working on it. Page 8. They could not even be buried in the same cemeteries. Technically, African Americans had the right to vote. However, many local laws made it impossible for them to do so. Some communities levied or charged poll taxes, or enforced literacy requirements, or imposed other restrictions that made it difficult or impossible for black people to register and vote. And since people who were not registered to vote weren't allowed to serve on juries or run for political offices, many African Americans were deprived or not given of these civil rights as well. During the 1930s, the United States experienced the Great Depression. There's a great fact. The Great Depression was in the 30s. A decade-long period of economic struggle. Jobs became difficult to find, wages decreased dramatically, and all Americans suffered. But African Americans faced the most serious challenges of finding work. For many African Americans, World War II was an opportunity to make a better life for themselves. and their families. Black men enlisted in the military in large numbers. Even though they served in separate black infantry regiments, usually overseen by white officers, they believed that their loyalty and patriotism would help blacks to earn rights that white citizens had. Women also enlisted in the Army, where they were called WACs, or Women's Army Corps, and they served in all-female units in the Navy too. And for women like Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson, and Christine Darden, World War II opened the door to a career as a professional mathematician. There's a great fact. World War II opened some doors for jobs for those women. Each of them found their way to the Langley Laboratory, where they met one another. And women like them, smart, brave, and confident, and good at math. The war was changing the world, and it would change their lives as well. Chapter 2. A door opens. The newspaper ad caught the attention of many women. It read, "Reduce your household duties." Women who are not afraid to roll up their sleeves and do jobs previously filled by men should call the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory. So they started advertising for job openings for women. A few years earlier, an ad like this would have been unthinkable. Most employers never would have considered a woman for a job and had always been performed by a man. But in the spring of 1943, with World War II in full swing and many men off serving in the military, the country needed all the help it could get. Employers were beginning to hire women to do jobs, and that had once belonged only to men. This particular ad was placed by the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA, N-A-C-A, a government agency dedicated to studying the science of flying. There's a great fact for you. The NACA shared a campus with the U.S. Army Air Corps in Hampton, Virginia, a city in the southeastern part of the state next to the Chesapeake Bay. Okay, those are great facts. The NACA's mission was important and unique: to help the United States develop the most powerful and efficient airplanes in the world. Okay, so there's a great fact. NACA wants to establish this powerful Air Force, basically. Airplanes moved military troops, they tracked enemies, and they launched bombs. World leaders felt that the country that ruled the skies would win the war. Great fact. So in order to win the war, people thought that they needed to rule the skies. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, believed in the importance of air power. So 2 years earlier, in 1941, he had challenged the nation to increase its production of airplanes to 50,000 units a year. Okay, this is important. At that time, the industry had manufactured only 3,000 planes per year. So the FDR is asking the country to go from producing or making 3,000 airplanes a year to 50,000 airplanes a year. But where are all the men? The men are largely away at war. So NACA is having to develop these airplanes with a lot of people gone, and they're having to use women to help now. The NACA and private industry were up for the challenge, and by 1943, the American aircraft industry was the largest, most productive, and most sophisticated in the world, making 3 times more planes than the Germans, who were fighting on the other side of the war. Victory through air power. Before manufacturers built the airplanes, the designs were developed, tested, and refined at Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory. There's a great fact. So all of these aircrafts that are being made, before they can be put into production, they're tested, pretty rigorous testing at Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory. There's a great fact, which was where the NACA had first begun its operations in 1917. The engineers created wind tunnels to simulate or imitate different conditions a plane could encounter when flying. This helped the engineers to test airplane parts as well as whole aircraft, in examining them for any problems like air disturbance and uneven wing geometry. After the testing, pilots flew the planes trying to assess how the machines handled in the air. And did the aircraft roll unexpectedly? Did it stall? Was it hard to guide or maneuver? Making small changes to the design added up to difference in performance. Even tiny improvements in speed and efficiency multiplied over millions of pilot miles added to a difference that could tip the balance of the war. People working at Langley knew that they were doing their part in the war, victory through air power, and Henry Reed, the engineer in charge of the Langley Laboratory, and the workers took their mission to heart. Okay, we're going to stop there today, Team Alabama. You should have a good 10 facts or even more, maybe close to 20. If not, please go back and reread and add to your facts. You might want to start with some questions too. Did America catch up to where they wanted to be? Did they produce the number of planes? How did the women get in their positions? Ask some questions. Okay, and then we'll continue to read and see if we can answer those questions. And you might have a few vocabulary words from the beginning of this as well. Simulate, okay, means to imitate, from page 12. Okay, add some of your vocab words. Have a great rest of your day, Team Alabama.